And all right, I think it's time to get started. Yes. Happy New Year, everyone. You know the sound. It's another ThursdAI, the first one of this year. And I am so happy to be back. It's not like we went anywhere. We did one. Like this last ThursdAI was just like we recapped the last year. And now we're back. And there's a bunch of exciting stuff to chat about. Obviously, a bunch of open source. Even though it does seem like a little bit like folks took a little bit of a vacation. And as I started summing up the things we're going to talk about this week, it started to look like, oh, there's maybe not a lot. But then we got breaking news as I was summing up. So we're going to talk about them as well. And there's quite a few things to cover today. So we're going to have quite a few things in open source. Let me just run through everything we're going to talk about. This is a new thing I'll do. I'll just try to run through this quick so you guys remember. And then we're going to go in depth on each one. And then, we'll see if we're going to have more of a conversation. We just a little bit of a housekeeping today. So first of all, everybody who's new here, you're listening to ThursdAI. ThursdAI is a podcast and a newsletter. It's recorded live on X. This is what, if you're in the audience right now on X, this is what you hear right now. My name is Alex Volkov. I'm a AI evangelist with Weights and Biases. And I've been doing this in some form or another since March 14th. So we're coming up on a year. I should start thinking about what we're going to do in a year. Maybe we'll do like a proper raffle. I don't know. Maybe we'll give out GPU credits. We'll see. We have a few more months. And we've been tracking open source AI, LLMs with big companies. We've been tracking voice and audio advancements and vision. We're going to talk about some exciting vision stuff as well. So if you're not following any of the podcast or the newsletter, I welcome you to go to thursdai.news and sign up. Definitely the motto here is we stay up to date so you don't have to. And obviously, there's a lot of people who do this type of podcast / newsletter / space. Ours is a very specific one. There's no debates too much. There's barely any kind of conversations. We just give you an updates about what's happened in order to fairly quickly get you up to speed and let you go back to your work. Oftentimes, I'm joined by experts in different fields on stage because I'm not an expert in many of the stuff that I talk about. And it's really fun to hear from the folks who are actually building the stuff. And so we have a few of those in the audience, and oftentimes they join on stage and talk to us about the stuff they released. This actually, we do have this time we have in the audience, we have Jun Yang from the Quen team in Alibaba, and we're going to talk about QuenVL. We've talked about Quen before for those who remember. And we oftentimes have news research folks and some other great people in the open source LLM industry. We're definitely big friends with Hugging Face as well. I see Omar in the crowd, and we're going to talk about some stuff that recently Hugging Face released with audio. Actually, NVIDIA released it and soon, but Hugging Face and VB, one of the friends of the pod here, who's into the audio stuff, did the main announcement about, which is a shout out to VB as well. And we're here every week, and you're more than welcome to follow me and follow Umesh as well. ThursdAI actually is one of the speakers here. If you follow that account, you'll get only the ThursdAI content, not my personal content as well. And here's a brief recap of everything we're going to talk about today. So generally, the structure is fairly the same, so you can expect to hear the structure every week. We talk about open source first because this is what we love, open source LLMs, not just like open source, that would be too much to talk about. We talk about open source LLMs. Specifically, we've talked about fine-tunes and different models and different releases. And so this week, we're going to talk about the new WizardCoder. I actually have a thing prepared for that. AI breaking news coming at you only on ThursdAI. I love using this little newsy transition because WizardCoder just announced their new model, and we're going to talk about that. We also going to cover Teknium's Hermes2 fine-tune on Solar 10.7b. So if you guys remember, we've talked about Solar from Upstage, and we've talked about Sung Kim is, I think, the CEO there. We've talked about them and the potential of did they train on something else, etc. So we talked about this last week. But since we've talked about this, Teknium and News have trained on Solar, so we're going to talk about that. And we're also going to talk about exciting news, potentially exciting news in the world of embeddings. I see a few embedding friends that are welcome to also chime in on the stage as well. We're going to talk about the E5 state-of-the-art embeddings from Microsoft. And this is, I think, all in open source. It's been a quiet-ish week. If you remember some crazy weeks, we had days that are like bigger than this, but still, there's a few exciting stuff to talk about here. Then we're switching usually to the big companies and LLMs and APIs. Actually, this was a very quiet week from the big companies. Nothing from OpenAI, nothing from Anthropic. I think I got one email from Anthropic saying they changed terms and conditions, not something interesting for us to report about. But Samsung is about to announce something with AI, so we're going to probably talk about this a little bit and speculate. And then Perplexity announced a round. They're not a big company, but they're getting there. In the world of vision, this week we actually have a very exciting conversation because Qwen, which is Alibaba's LLM, and recently LMM, so large multimodal, have upgraded their Qwen VL1, which we've talked about before, to the Plus version in 14B, and I had a chance to play around with this. We have one of the authors, like I said, in the audience, Junyang. And then we're going to talk about that. And Junyang, if you want to, you're welcome to come up and tell us what's new there. And also C-Act from, where's C-Act from? OSU NLP group. The guys behind Mind2Web. So we're going to talk about C-Act, which is taking GPT-4 vision and making it a general web agent. And then in the voice and audio category, we have something that beats Whisper. It's pretty cool. And I think a cool thing to chat about is the mobile Aloha bot. So basically, the last category we have is tools and agents. And I think it's about time to add bots there. Because I think this year, if we listen to Jim Fan, this year is going to be the year of the bots. And definitely the Stanford released mobile Aloha made a splash on the web. And definitely, probably most of you saw the video of that little robot like driving around and doing tasks. So we're going to chat about that as well. And I think that this is all we have for today. It's not a huge lineup because it's the first week of the year. People are waiting. But exciting stuff from Wizard, definitely. All right, folks, so this is what we have for today. And I think it's time to get started. And I think I already did the sound, the news breaking sound. But WizardCoder is one of the coolest things that was just released. And it's worth mentioning for sure. So let me just add this to you guys on the Jumbotron so you can see. WizardCoder from Wizard LM has just released, 2 hours ago, just as I was starting to arrange my notes for today, they released a new Finetune, and I think it's a DeepSeek Finetune. We've talked about DeepSeek before, DeepSeek Coder, and they claim to achieve a state-of-the-art performance on the HumanEval evaluation, and I think another one as well, MBPP, which I'm actually not super familiar with, and they also have HumanEval Plus. So basically, Wizard LM have fine-tuned whatever data sets they have on top of DeepSeek and DeepSeek Coder, which DeepSeek Coder is a very capable coding open source model that we've talked about before, and now they achieve like a insane almost 80%, 79.9% in HumanEval. So on pass one. So HumanEval, for those of you who are not familiar, some new folks are joining us. HumanEval is a set of Python questions, I think from OpenAI, if I'm not mistaken. And there's an interesting kind of confusion there where you can ask your model to solve these Python questions with one pass, or you can actually do several passes. And then obviously, the more information you give the LLM, the more chance to fail and see the failure mode, the better it does. And pass one, solving 80% or getting like a 79.9% score is for an open source model is extremely impressive. It passes GPT 3.5 Turbo, which we all used until GPT-4 and we all loved. And, most of Copilot, I think it was using Codex or GPT 3.5 level code. So this is a model that passes. Copilot is 2.5 years, maybe 3 years in existence. So this is an open source model that passes all of that. And I actually have something to mention there in a second. It passes the GeminiPro as well. GeminiPro actually on that, if you're looking at the same graph that I'm looking at, which is pinned to the top of the space, GeminiPro is not that great at all those scores. So we're still waiting for Gemini Ultra, obviously, and we'll let you know when Ultra drops. And this is an open source model, a 33 billion parameter open source model. 33 billion parameters, by the way, can fully run on your Mac, especially if you get one of the latest ones, because quantize that can definitely run on your Mac. And it's incredible performance. Now, here's the kicker, okay? I've been playing with local models, and I will talk about this with LM Studio. And hint, hint, next week we may have an interview with LM Studio we've talked about. It gives you guys a super simple way to download models from Hugging Face, run them on your Mac using Metal. For some reason, they're not using MLX. And I've been able to run some of these models with LM Studio. And recently I saw a repo from Daniel Gross, the guy who invests together with Nat Friedman, previous co-founder of GitHub. They invest together, they do a bunch of stuff. Daniel Gross also does super cool things. He had a repo that enabled, with some configs in VS Code, enabled you to run local models with the Copilot interface, right? He had some code that shows you how, through settings, you can change the Copilot endpoint that for a local LLM that runs on your machine. And this is super cool. And so I saw this yesterday and I was like, can I do this? I want to try to do this. So definitely now the WizardCoder is achieving like this great performance. I want to see how fast this runs on my new Mac. I just got a new Mac and I posted a thread about this. I probably should add this to the top of the space. And I think we're going there, folks, like 79 on HumanEval. And the score here, like ridiculous. And I think it's very close, if not already there, that on beefier computers, you're going to be able to run the coding assistance completely offline. And completely offline means several things for many people. We've talked about this, obviously. None of your code gets shared with GitHub or Microsoft. For many of us, it's not a big deal. Honestly, for me, it's not that big a deal. But also downtimes without network, you can code on a plane, which many people like to do. Many people who fly to San Francisco and back, they preload those LLMs. And obviously, you can tweak it and you can ask it to do the stuff that you want to do. Not to mention fine-tune. If you have a specific coding style, etc., you can probably fine-tune as well. Very exciting, WizardCoder 33B, and we're going to test it out. However, since it just released 2 hours ago, I haven't been able to play with this. Omar, you want to comment on the WizardCoder real quick?
Yeah, exactly. Hi, everyone. I'm the Chief Llama Officer at Hugging Face. I work a bit in open source product communities, a bit of everything.
I will never get tired of hearing, I'm the Chief Llama Officer. This is amazing, dude. Yeah, go ahead, please. Go ahead.
Yeah, so I just wanted to say that I think that the release is quite exciting. I think, as you mentioned, the model is based on DeepSeek Coder. And I think it's important to mention that HumanEval, it is a very small data set. I think it's 160 per questions. And DeepSeek Coder, they have an instruct version, which is 78.7, and this one is 79.9. So the improvement is nice, but actually it's just 2 more questions, right, in the evaluation. So I think the release is nice. We saw they have for these very cool models that perform very nice, but I think, we'll see how it performs actually being just in production use cases. But yeah, I just wanted to mention that because HumanEval, everyone is using it to compare conv models, but it's really not super good evaluation data set.
Yeah, HumanEval is a very common one. And like we tend to over-index on that one score, Omar. I think you're right. They also have quite a difference between the MBPP kind of score. I don't know about MBPP, but WizardCoder like underperforms with GPT 3.5 Turbo. So sometimes I think this is this is a statement we're going to have to say every time we talk about scores. The evaluations don't mean necessarily real world performance. We all know this and we keep talking about this. However, they give us some estimate, but they definitely are being used by folks to like jump on scores and do announcements from time to time. Definitely there's a difference between real world performance and scores. I think it's interesting that you say that this fine-tune a wizard on top of already very well-performing DeepSeek Coder is just like a few more questions right. Because this doesn't necessarily mean that it's, just a little bit better. It could be quite significantly better. For example, if they train it on, I don't know, longer code generations, for example. I haven't tested yet, and we will test and get back to you. But as we often talk about, the way to evaluate many of these things is not only evaluation scores, but basically vibes and what people say after they use them a while. And here, I think is my good time to also remind you folks, the subreddit called Local Llama is one good place. And another place is LMC's Arena. LMC's is, I think, from also Stanford. If I'm not mistaken, probably mistaken. LMC's.arena, it is like a human evaluation score that they have after you go there and you play with a bunch of models, LLMs mostly, and then you choose which of the suggestions. You get 2 suggestions in the same window. You don't know which model is what. And then you as a person, you choose. And then they collect like a bunch of choices, and then they give us like a round score of like human preference. This is more for LLMs, less for code. But definitely it's also a very good way of actually figuring out like what's going on and how these models perform. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to say that for code, what will be interesting, I think actually gathering feedback for code can be potentially much easier to get once it's integrated well into VS Code, for example. Once we have Copilot kind plugins with local LLMs, as you were mentioning before, potentially based on if people actually use the code that was suggested by the LLM, that will be a very nice way to gather data. I think that will be quite interesting. But yeah, we'll see how that looks.
Absolutely. Go ahead, Umesh.
Yeah, we are already using a local model with VS Code extension. I'm really excited. Like this is probably going to be one of the things that we'll do quite quickly to test this out. And if it stands the kind of benchmarks, then even fine tune on your own repository could be really a groundbreaking thing.
I was browsing. I was like, why not more people are talking about this? If you can run local models with the same interface with Copilot, with the same integration, but behind the scenes, it will talk to your local models, that would be super cool. And it's possible. And I can't wait to try it out. So I will try to report back to you guys about this for sure. And here's the thing, right? Here's the thing. A quick thing before we move on. I got this new Mac. I've talked to you about this. I have a thread of me setting this up. I will add this. And finally, I have a beefy machine that can run like 33 billion plus models. And I've been running them. And I've been running the next model that we're going to talk about is News Hermes update on Solar. But News also has a 33 billion parameters fine-tune on top of Yi. And that's 20 tokens a second on this machine. And that's very fast. Even for code generation, that's quite fast. Definitely is as fast as like Copilot was, at least in the beginning. Copilot now is way faster. Yeah, thank you, Omar. Thank you for hopping up. Omar needs to step down. I've been running this locally on LM Studio, and I've been thinking, like, if I can connect Copilot to this backend, would I use this? Would I use this on top of, I don't know, the paid version of Copilot that's always there? I actually don't know. I don't know if I would, but if I can fine tune, that's a different story. Okay, so a new fine-tune from News Hermes. Hermes is one of the better performing smaller models that around the 7B. If you didn't use News Hermes 7B on top of Mistral, you're missing out on the local models thing. Everybody's talking about this model as like being one of the more performing ones. And this is coming from the News research team, specifically Teknium and his Hermes dataset. And as we were talking about the Solar 10.7b last week and kind of the back and forth, we actually talked with Sung from the Solar team, from Upstage, I think the company, the Korean company behind Solar. We've talked about how they trained it, whether or not they use different methods. We also talked about attribution or lack thereof of this merging method that they came out with a paper. And then Andy95, which is a community member in the open source who we invited to ThursdAI, and he didn't want to join because he doesn't like to speak English, apparently. So we talked with the Solar team about the lack of attribution in their paper. However, meanwhile, this kind of conversation was going on. Still, it's worth mentioning that all of the top models on top of Hugging Face leaderboard in open source large language models are trained, all of them are Solar 10.7b. This model apparently beats like 70 billion parameter models as well, at least on the Hugging Face leaderboard. And as we were talking about whether or not they attributed correctly, whether or not the merging, thing, I think they called it DUS, whether they came up with this, whether it's novel, all that conversation that we had, Teknium was fine-tuning throughout all of this time. Teknium was fine-tuning the kind of the top model there. And so News Hermes released on top of Solar 10.7b. I ran this locally. It's very capable. I literally, and I wanted to mention this on ThursdAI, I literally used this model instead of GPT-4 to do a specific task that I needed to do. And I wanted to tell you all about this. So without going back there, because last time it was like a whole thing, there is a renewed interest in this like superconductor thing. And then most of the time about the superconductor, people talk about this in different places. But I do use my tools to translate the news as they come out. And sometimes the translation is not that great. And so I use LLMs to go to take the whole translation, a whole transcription, and just ask LLM to translate it or to correct the translation. I use this often, and this needs a lot of context. And so I didn't used to use GPT-4 for this, but now with a lot of context, I try to use GPT-4 for this. And funny thing happened, really funny thing. And I love OpenAI, and you guys know my love for GPT-4, and it changed our lives. I started getting this. Okay, the text was in Chinese. This was an interview in one of the Chinese networks. And I started getting this very interesting network error. Very interesting. Every time for the same text, I pasted the Chinese text, I started getting the network error. I pasted the English translation, started getting a network error. And after 3 or 4 tries, this didn't anymore seem like a random network error anymore. It seemed, hey, some classifier, something in OpenAI, something triggers their whatever. And for some reason, they're not telling me something else. It was really super weird. I tried 5-6 times on the same text. I was consistently getting network errors. I even posted about this on my feed. And so I went on Claude, which I use often, and Claude definitely has a bigger context, and Claude was able to help me with the translation. And then it also failed. So there was a lot of text there. I want to say 18,000 tokens or so, maybe. So Claude actually started translating it and didn't get to the end. And then I was like, hey, I have this like LM Studio on my Mac now. I have the bigger context window models as well. We have Capybara 33B on top of Yi. We have this like latest release from Teknium. And I tried the Solar like Teknium Hermes translation, literally pasted all of it, and I got a great answer. And I literally am sitting there and I'm thinking, hey, this is a great example of why open source models exist. First of all, if to believe OpenAI, the network errors are problematic, and now I'm sidestepping them because there's no network errors. You run the model on your machine. Second of all, I'm not sure if that's an actual network error. Honestly, like for the same text, suddenly like it fails. It smelled not that great for OpenAI. I actually don't know why. I can send you guys the text afterwards, probably put it in show notes. I don't know why it was like what it was triggering in there. It wasn't, there's no profanities there. Maybe something about Chinese and government, maybe, I don't know. But here is an actual use case. And I just wanted to highlight this. Nistan, go ahead. Also, introduce yourself briefly.
Hey everyone, I'm Nistan Tahir. I am a software dev in Toronto and been working on a lot of these open source models lately, and previously worked on the first Doctor wrapper on the market. Yeah, I was going to say, to be fair to OpenAI, running DevOps for 100 million users at once, that kind of stuff is going to happen. It shouldn't happen, but it is just the scale of things. Just you're running DevOps for 100 million people, you're going to have some over provisioning issues. Something went out. So I don't think it could be a censorship or monitoring thing, but they're monitoring everything anyway. So I would just give that to a DevOps hiccup. But again, it highlights the point that when you have the model locally, you don't worry about that.
Nistan, I'm with you. And you know that like in ThursdAI specifically, I'd rather not have any conspiracy type stuff. You know that this is my like stance on ThursdAI specifically, but I've tried different texts and they passed. So like it didn't feel like a downtime on their end. And also it did get to a certain point and suddenly showed me a network. So I'll send you the text and then we'll do the test together. If it fails for somebody else, then it's no longer a DevOps issue. I don't believe. But definitely this highlights the open source nature of if you run this model on your computer, then you will not have these issues. And again, folks, hopefully next week we're going to talk about LM Studio, which is, I found, the best way to actually chat with these models on your Mac, and all of you can download it today. But next week we're going to talk about LM Studio with LM Studio. Hopefully do a deeper dive there. All right, I want to introduce VB to the stage. VB, welcome. Feel free to introduce yourself, and then I wanted to chat to you about MLX because I know you're part of that community.
Sure. Hey everyone, I'm BB. I work as a developer advocate for audio and a bunch of other things at Hugging Face, and nice to be back.
It's great having you. Happy New Year, brother. So you're also part of the MLX kind of community, right? So MLX, just briefly for folks in the audience, Apple released a way for us to run inference on specifically Apple hardware without any additional requirements. I think without the PyTorch MPS backend, maybe. So could you give like a brief primer
Yes.
about MLX?
So just for everyone else, like MLX is basically a framework much like how PyTorch is or TensorFlow is or JAX is, except MLX is a framework built from ground up, taking everything that is good from individually all of these, frameworks. It is built specifically for one device, and that is, Mac. And right now, it only supports the Metal backend. But in future, once the neural engine backend becomes public or has public APIs, then it would also support that, right? And like it came out, I think, sometime in December or end of November, and it's been picking up like crazy. There's almost like a tribalistic, community around it, wherein people are converting checkpoints to MLX format, and they also support quantization. They're not at one-on-one with, say, llama.cpp right now, but they've been gaining speed and they've been like making improvements pretty much every other release. If you want to get in on the action ahead of time, then I would definitely recommend keeping an eye out on MLX, as well as next examples, which is the repo wherein all the inference magic happens.
Awesome. Vibia, so there's like this MLX community. There's a bunch of work I've seen, maybe because I have you on my Twitter feed, but maybe because I follow like many people. Do models need to be converted / quantized into this format to be able to run?
So funny you asked that. Over this week, we were working with the MLX core devs so beforehand, you had to convert it into an NPZ format. So into essentially a format which was non-standard, right? And recently we added support for Safe, which allows essentially all Llama / Mistral / Tiny Llama checkpoints to be directly be loaded from their transformer safe tensors file. And this essentially means that you don't need to do the conversion anymore, right? There is, however, one caveat, like in case you want to run quantized models, then you need to quantize them. And, you can again push them to the hub. What we've done right now is we've provided scripts so that you can convert these checkpoints directly from transformers checkpoints. So this means that not only Llama 2 or, Mistral, not only the base checkpoints work, but also all the fine tunes that the community has, right? For example, noise, Hermes checkpoints, or, all of the different fine tunes that keep coming up on the OpenLLM leaderboard or thereafter, all of them work as long as they have a safe tensors file on the hub. So you can directly just do Python space generate.py, pass the hub identifier, and it automatically downloads, and it just works.
Wow, that's great. And the benefit there, this is supported by the kind of the Apple folks as well. And it looks like Apple is definitely stepping up their game in terms of local inference on machines. Go ahead, Nissan.
Yeah, I was going to say something, but I also had a question for VB. The interesting part of this will be when it comes to, I think it will be when it comes to Xcode development and getting stuff to run on iPhones and iPads, because you've got such a vast amount of people to deploy to. And the options right now are pretty limited. You can run llama.cpp, but it's a pain to do it in Xcode. I did it way back in March. You can run MLC, which works, but it's again a very small team. It's mainly one person doing the whole thing, the TVM, the Tensor Virtual Machine. So I am glad there is this support here now, because it will mean that eventually we'll have also much better support for Apple accelerated silicon to run these models in. So now my question stems from this difficulty, and that is to use the neural engine chip of Apple to actually run more of the LLM workloads. Right now, it does a lot of vision stuff. It can do ResNet. It can even do Clip, but it can't really do the text processing, the LLM text processing via the neural engine, because it's just too much work. A lot of the magic multiply operations are different. It does some quantizing by default that you have to do. So it's a little bit of a mess. And I always hope that they would come up with some programming abstraction like MLX and stuff to work on this. But yeah, my question for VB is that this is only for Metal right now, right? It's only for Metal and only for Mac, or do you know if it's more supported for iPhones as well?
If I got your question, then it was like about Core ML, right? Listen.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. So essentially, if you look at it, like the biggest problem right now, if someone wants to run workloads on Neural Engine, is that first of all, Neural Engine is not an open API, right? So essentially, you need to like run it using a Core ML runner and just hope that the Neural Engine sort of processor decides to put your model on the Neural Engine and run through it, right? And there's no way for us to sort of program that, okay, this model should run on Neural Engine. It's decided, at the time of inference. And so that's one of the biggest issues. And also ORML works by and large on static shapes. So you cannot, so you need to decide on a prompt length or like a generation length, and it would only generate up until then. There are like some hacks to get around it, but that is like one of the biggest issues right now. One of the things that I'm quite bullish about is there is a PR open in MLX, which adds a Core ML runner. And of course, like right now, MLX does not directly support the Neural Engine runner, but at least like we get to bridge the gap of being able to have like freely shaped input and, essentially just run whatever we're running via Core ML runner as well as Metal backend. So that's definitely a step in that direction. And also the reason why I'm also like betting on the MLX team is because it's from Apple. So the minute, Neural Engine becomes an open API, MLX would be the first one to integrate it, just because they would have the first dibs and they would be able to support it much better as well. And that's also why like MLX, if you've ever run like a workload on MLX, it's just so nice to see that it scales so well and they automatically parallelize tasks and so on. In general, I think to summarize, look for the PR for Core ML runner on MLX. And second, hope that Apple releases or opens the API for Neural Engine.
Okay, thank you. Because so far I've only been able to run Whisper on Core ML, and that was a mess to get working, but it worked. I'm going to look at this, and their code is pretty clean and stuff too. So I'm also looking forward to like how you can integrate MLX just for Apple workloads while keeping the rest of the code the same. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So at least they are starting to somewhat support it.
Speaking of Whisper, VB, you had another thing you wanted to chat about, and being mindful of your time. This is one of the things that I have. So we're skipping forward to the voice and audio category, folks, just because we have VB here and he's the expert and I'm not. But NVIDIA plus Suno. If you guys remember Suno, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago. Recently, they came into significant highlight because Microsoft added them to the Microsoft Copilot as a plugin. And so you can generate full songs with audio and lyrics and just like very long songs, very nice ones. We covered Suno back then. So now together with NVIDIA and Suno, they released something that's called Parakeet. And VB, you're the first one who I heard from talking about this. So would love for you to introduce Parakeet and then talk about some of the interesting architecture there and also how it beats what it beats.
Perfect. Okay, awesome. So the release Parakeet, first of all, it's an English-only model. It comes in two variants. One is a RNN transducer variant, and the other is a CTC variant. And it comes in two sizes. One is a 0.6 billion parameter size, and the other is a 1.1 billion parameter size. Now, why is this interesting? Is that at least for English, it beats Whisper to punch. And it beats Whisper by almost like 0.75 word error rate, which means that for every 100 words that you transcribe, Parakeet model make one less mistake than Whisper. And that's huge, especially if you're like transcribing, hours and hours of audio. Not just that, these models are roughly 2 to 3 times faster than the fastest possible implementation of Whisper.
Oh, I didn't know this part. Faster than the insanely fast Whisper thing that you guys worked on?
Yes,
Wow.
definitely yes. And the reason why this is because Whisper is an encoder-decoder model, right? It just by the virtue of it, it works similar to how, like, it would take audio as an input and then like it would decode text out, akin to how LLMs would work and so on, right? However, the way parakeet models work is by using CTC, which is a method of, essentially having a fixed vocabulary of letters and essentially transcribing a letter at a time. And it's just like blazingly fast because it doesn't have to do like any sort of like the decoding step in a CTC model is essentially just a softmax or essentially classifying between 70 or 80 odd characters, right? And so in English, you only have, say, 26 characters, add some numbers and so on. So it's generally quite easy to train a model on that and, essentially get fast transcriptions, right? And I think the only other important thing over here is like, how did they actually get such nice results? Is they essentially trained on something like 65,000 hours of data, and out of which 25,000 hours of data was public. So it's like all the public data sets that are available for English, LibreSpeech, Vox Populi, couple other people speech and so on, like all of these data sets. And they also have like, I think something like 40,000 hours of data that they curated themselves, which they haven't released. And it's likely that it is this 40,000 hours of data, which is really high quality, which led to the performance gain. And
how much is that compared to Whisper? Do you remember? I think you compared it. Whisper was
Whisper is 4 million. Yeah.
Yeah. So like 65,000 hours, and Whisper is 4 million, and this beats Whisper by one less mistake for an hour, right? Of audio or something. Wow.
For every 100 words that it transcribes, it makes one less mistake. Yeah. So it's like much less than an hour. So maybe 2 minutes.
Yeah.
And I think just to say that, why is this like one thing that is very nice about these models is that these are commercially viable. So essentially like non-commercially viable, but like they are commercially available. So you can do whatever you want with these models, same as like how Whisper is as well. So like they are fully open source, except that we just don't know where the 40,000 hours of data came from. So build APIs on top of it, essentially.
Yeah, so you can run those in your own things without fearing that NVIDIA is going to come after you. Oh, this is very cool. Like super fast transcription, English only, unfortunately, right? So many of these translation use cases, for example, like Targum, the startup that I built before joining Weights and Biases, I specifically need the multilinguality of Whisper. So this is English only. However, we know for a fact, for example, I know that this specific space, the whole transcription, we're going to do this in English only. Running this through something like that is probably going to be very interesting. Maybe I have a few questions because, in order to use this, Whisper gets something like initial prompt in order to, let's say, when I say VB, that it knows what VB is, or like Umesh or whatever. ThursdAI, for example, is not a word, so it doesn't understand it. Whisper has initial prompt. Does this have something similar to that? Or would it be
no, just because of the way the architecture is, you cannot do like initial prompts. So like you cannot pass an embedding and say that condition towards it. Because the decoding step is just classification, right? There's no thinking. Not thinking is like a very abstract term, but there's nothing you can do to steer the output towards a particular classification here.
Oh, I see.
So I tried it in other languages, and I posted a link to the space so people can try it too. It's very interesting when you talk to it in other languages. You'll output like English sounding kind of words, but they're very accurate as to what you're saying. So it's almost like you watch those TikToks and videos of people trying to sound like English speakers, but this is that in reverse. It's pretty funny. I recommend people to just try out the space, talk to it in another language, and just watch it Englishify all the output. It's pretty interesting. It works well too.
The reason why it works is because it's essentially taking like 10 milliseconds of audio, and it is assumed that as a phoneme, and then it classifies it into, one of 70 possible characters, right? Whichever phonemic sound in English would it map to, it would just output that letter, right?
I was just saying that it's kind of a transliteration. So basically, there could be some other applications also, right? Because specifically for, if you talk about in India, the way English is used and even Hindi words are transliterated into English. So it could be used for that.
Yeah, definitely. You can also do that with Whisper to an extent as well. But there's definitely like use cases like that. Although if it was like, if I was to do something like that, I would definitely want to use something with like a model which is specifically created for that purpose instead of like something like this. But yeah, definitely, like it's a fun use case.
You mentioned also two other things, Vivi, that it doesn't hallucinate. Whisper has a big problem where sometimes at the end, it would just add words that nobody said in the thing. So this doesn't do that because of the architecture?
Yes, exactly. And so the reason for that again is that the problem with Whisper is that if there is silence, right, it still wants to predict like some sort of text for it, right? Just because it is an encoder decoder architecture, right? So for every input, it wants to create some output, and it just cannot say that it's silence for 30 seconds, right? In this case, in the case of parakeet models, because like you can map no sound to nothing but a space, right? In terms of an actual character, you just say that if there is no sound, or if there is sound of rain, or if there is any sound which is not a phoneme, then you just map it to a blank space. Then the model just does not hallucinate architecturally, right? And it just works wonders. By the way, we also have wave-to-wake 2 models, XLSR wave-to-wake 2 models from Facebook, also conformer models from Facebook, also on the hub. These are all like models which follow the same architecture. They also don't hallucinate. It's not like a new technology.
I think I recapped Parakeet very well. We were just talking about, it took us a while to beat Whisper. And then I think Whisper version 3 came out and then back on top. So almost a year and a half since Whisper first released. And it's still undeniably the king in multilingual. So it's very interesting because, in other areas of open source, we get jumps, significant jumps in performance, in context length, in different areas. And this one looks like it's all about data, or at least like a huge amount of high quality data, etc. So you gotta wonder if the data sets from them will be released at some point. But also, how to follow this. I told folks to follow you anywhere else.
Yeah, I think just like purely from like speech standpoint, right? Be it text to speech and also be it speech recognition, the biggest problem is that the data just like not just in terms of available data, but also like just in terms of size. When you start training these models, you just need like really massive amount of compute to train them, just because your per token sort of memory required is higher, right, for audio models. So that's why like inherently it's very difficult for people to train models at this scale. In fact, there's Shinji, who is the main author of ESP.NET. He at CMU is running a project called Open Whisper project, wherein they're trying to get to Whisper scale, but using like open data sets. As an interesting project, do look out for those checkpoints. They're going to release another one maybe soon. And, and they're struggling big time just to get like enough compute to use all the open access data sets in the first place, right? So I think the space is still trying to figure out what to use, what to not use. Whisper Large V3 definitely showed us that we can use synthetic data or like pseudo labeled data. That's something that we also did with this, Distill Whisper. And in this year, I definitely envision and, I'm quite confident that we see much, much better models than, what we see today. So yeah, I'm quite bullish. And if, anything that happens in open access or open source audio space, I definitely those or, tweet about those. If you want, add me to a list or something. And yeah.
Yeah, follow VB. VB, feel free to stick around. I know you were tight on time. If you need to drop, definitely feel free to stick around. The next thing that we have in this area is Kokui. And if you guys remember, we talked about Kokui when they released the XTTS open source text-to-speech, which was the best at the time. And we had Josh from Kokui here. Kokui was a machine learning group in Mozilla. It started there, and they created deep speech and common voice and different other TTS things. And then it spun out in 2021. And so we had Josh up on stage here when they announced XTTS, which they launched as a web app and the open release. And unfortunately, not every startup there works out. Even those who support open source as well, unfortunately, have to find ways to make it work. And so with, we oftentimes update about great news, but sometimes friends of ours need to continue to somewhere else. I'm sure many of those folks are super, super talented. So I'm not worried about their personhood and kind of their ability to make money in this world. But they had partnerships with Hugging Face and Mozilla and Indiana and Google and NVIDIA, like all these like great things. And still the business looked like it wasn't taking off. There's a few other kind of text-to-speech startups that do make it. Play.ht seems to be in a good place. And obviously 11 Labs we heard about. None of them released open source, and Kokui did. And unfortunately, they shut down. Shout out to Kokui, shout out to Josh and the Kokui team. If anybody's hiring, the Kokui team is probably a good place to reach out if you're into this. And so reach out to them if you're hiring for those positions. So this is a shout out for Cookie. It's still, the Cookie TTS is still on GitHub, so you still can use it, just no longer going to be supported. Shout out to our friends from Cookie. And I think this is it for us on the voice and audio thing. And I think we're moving to, let's cover the big company LLMs and APIs, just real brief. There's nothing else there besides, there's not a lot of stuff, like I said in the beginning. The two things that I wanted to mention is Perplexity is the kind of the new search engine coolness with AI. And it's very interesting how fast Perplexity grows. And I, from time to time, use Perplexity. I don't pay for it yet. I probably should at this point. It looks like many people already have replaced Google with Perplexity. I definitely use their mobile app, and they have a quick launch thing. Perplexity has AI built into search, and they're growing fairly fast. And I honestly, when I started thinking about this, I thought this task is going to be impossible compared to Google size and Bing and all these. And even Bing, with all the Microsoft's backup and power and money, doesn't come close to Google, or at least didn't used to. But then ChatGPT came, and then, Google started stressing out because many people just prefer the chat interface on top of just Googling. And, we've talked about where's Google most of this year, or most of last year. We're already in the new year. So most of last year. And then Google obviously came out with Gemini. Google introduced Bard into the search results. So many people do actually want to ask questions in the natural language and not contort themselves into how to think about asking the Google engine specifically for best results. And Perplexity is like behind the scenes already been doing this for a while, before Bard, before I think around the time with Microsoft Copilot integration. But definitely it's a search engine with AI rather than AI on top of a search engine. And they just announced a new round, and I think like a $200 million valuation or so. And so shout out to Perplexity. I probably should start thinking about paying for them, because I definitely saw some search results that are okay.
The one thing I really like, because I also you use Perplexity on the mobile, is that it allows you on iPhone to log in with an anonymous account, which just forwards to your Apple ID. And that's one of the only ways that you can have an anonymized login for all your search results, still pay for it, and not have to give out your bank account, kids account, main account information. So you can just use it with the blah, 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 blah at iCloud.com. And you can have peace of mind and still pay for a good service. And that's one of the things that Perplexity has knocked it out of the park.
Wow.
With, I think, is that feature, because then on Mac you can do the same thing in Safari.
I think we're coming up on an hour and something. We still have a few news here, so I will just reset the space and say, hey everyone, you're listening to ThursdAI. ThursdAI, we're here weekly to talk about everything important in AI news from the LLM or LMM perspective, so multimodal, which is next, and then open source. We cover big companies. We just had experts on stage from Hugging Face talk about audio and the latest Suna releases. If you're into this and you missed any part of this, feel free to subscribe to ThursdAI.news, which is literally the website. .news is a top-level domain, apparently. So ThursdAI.news will take you to all the links to, you can listen to this on Spotify, wherever you get your podcast. And big thanks to the hosts, co-host Nistin and Umesh, and then guest speakers. We had a few from Hugging Face and some other folks. Now, as we move forward, I wanted to mention this one thing that we didn't cover in the area of open source, but this is from Microsoft, so this could fit nicely into the big company area. Microsoft released a state-of-the-art text embeddings model that was trained with Mistral. And if you guys remember, we've covered this before. I see friends in the audience who were here with us from Gina. Embeddings are a big thing with like retrieval augmented generation now. Many people don't rely on large context windows. Instead, they embed and put their data in a vector database. And in order to then retrieve them, you have to embed the queries. So embeddings started being a very big thing, even though a long time ago with Word2Vec, 10 years ago, I think, on NeurIPS, embeddings started. And Microsoft has announced like a new thing. I think for most people would use the ADA embedding endpoints from OpenAI. That's at least for most people. However, in the world of open source, there's a bunch of like embeddings happening. And so again, we've chatted with Bo, who's in the audience, about like GenAI's embeddings. They were state of the art back then. And I recently remember, I think again from Bo, a thread about many people, like with every other Hugging Face kind of evaluation that's open source, there's benefits from some people to actually fake and start training their models on top of the evaluations in the leaderboard. We've talked about this in the same with the OpenLLM leaderboard. The same happens with MTEB leaderboard, the big embeddings models. And today or yesterday, Microsoft released the E5 state-of-the-art text embedding model with a few interesting things in there. First of all, it tops the leaderboard in MTB. It's huge compared to other embeddings models. And again, if you're running open source embeddings, the benefit there that is as small as possible. So you think like half a gigabyte or a gig and a half for the bigger ones. The kind of the uprunning things so far were BGE and GTE, I think, GTE large, and then Cohere had an embedded model lately as well. And all of them are in the area of a gigabyte or half a gigabyte. Microsoft released a Mistral-based embedding model. So basically, they took Mistral and fine-tuned it to create embeddings, if I'm not mistaken, and that's 14 gigabytes in size. An additional thing in embeddings is like the dimension size. So 1024 dimension is roughly most of the embeddings on Hugging Face is 1024 dimensions. This one is like 4,000 dimensions. I think it's just like the basic, it connects to the context length of Mistral. And then also sequence length. Sequence length is just like how long a text can you shove into one embedding. Most of the open source ones were like 500 characters. This one is an incredible 32,000 characters into one embedding. Now, it doesn't make sense. Like we've talked about this before, embedding so much text will basically generalize whatever words in there to something very basic. So it's not going to be super useful for you to embed a whole 32,000 characters of a PDF, for example. If you embed all of this, you will not get like a very super helpful embedding, but it supports it. But I think on the actual model card, and I think we had somebody from the ThursdAI community told me that there's a recommendation of them to not exceed 4,000 tokens in the sequence length, even though it supports like 32,000. So I think it just like, they just put it there. So this is a state-of-the-art embeddings based on the numbers itself, but not necessarily the best one to use. Even and again showcases the utility of leaderboards, right? Like we have leaderboards. Sometimes they show what's the best model. Sometimes they're confusing. They're confusing because several things. One of them could be that the kind of the metrics based on which the leaderboard is created, they're not super useful in a real world scenario. E5 also requires a one-sentence instruction for queries, which adds complexity. So you have to tell it that you want to embed something in a specific way. Again, it's huge. And the alternative models, they're like as performant almost entirely on the average. There's like an average score that the Hugging Face gives you. It's called, they have 56 data sets. Basically, all of this size and all of this like dimension is barely better than a tiny 1 gigabyte model. By the way, welcome Bo to the stage. Bo from GenAI, welcome. And I saw you like react to this and reading the paper. Do you have any insights from this specific thing?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm Bo. And this is actually a really nice research paper because previously most of the embedding models are trained on like a encoder architecture because people think that the encoder architecture can learn a better like representation of the text or sentences. But this one was like trained on the Mistral 7 billion model, I think. And this model was purely a decoder architecture, I believe. Because this kind of decoder architecture, the previous tokens cannot see the next tokens. So people in the embedding community generally don't use pure decoder architecture to train embedding models because they think because of the lack of context information, this decoder model cannot learn a good representation. But this one was like bring some novelty here in terms of research. And the problem of this model is also quite huge because this model was trained on the synthetic generated data from the GPT 3.5 and GPT-4. So which means you cannot use it for the commercial purpose, because I think OpenAI have a license in their written that you cannot use OpenAI to train models to compete with OpenAI, and this one apparently it's rules from OpenAI. So basically, you can use it for research purpose, but not for business case. Even though this model might have a very loose license, but I guess the data is not allowed to use in the real world. Another problem is if you look at most of the powerful embedding models using the encoder architecture, is actually quite smaller. So if you can consider BERT large as a good backbone, so BERT large basically have a parameter size of around 300 million parameters, or maybe a little bit more, 330 million parameters. This one have 7 billion parameters, which means is much, much larger than the BERT to inference. So this might bring a little bit overhead. But the good thing about it is the training is very effective. So you get synthetic generated data. You don't have to do a lot of training. You just use LoRa to fine tune the 7 billion parameter model a little bit. Then it just worked out of the box and topped the leaderboard.
That's pretty cool.
And
Also,
so
languages as well, Bo? They mentioned like a lot of languages as well that it supports.
Yes, they said they synthetically generated sentence triplets to fine-tune this mixture into an embedding model to cover around 90 languages, including around 70-something low-resource languages. But maybe the author forgot one thing, is this mixture 7 billion model was trained on the English and code data, not other languages. I guess this model won't perform well on other languages, except English and coding and maybe a little bit not low resource languages. I doubt it will work, but also in the paper they shared that this model doesn't work well on the low resource languages. I think it's mostly because of the backbone was not trained on pre-trained on a lot of low resource languages.
Could you mention, thank you, Bo. First of all, thank you for joining us. Second of all, folks, again, we've chatted with Bo at length when Gina released where Bo works, their Gina embeddings model, and hoping to hear more news from you guys as well. Bo, could you talk about the embedding dimensions? They have 4,996 dimensions, which is like more than OpenAI's ARA, more than the open source ones. Is that something that people can utilize, or is that not super useful anyway?
Oh, I cannot actually comment on this because I don't really know. But normally people would prefer to use lower dimensionality because the output of the embeddings will be normally stored in the vector database. If you are familiar with vector database, basically they store embeddings or they store vectors. Then you need to conduct vector similarity search. This means that you have to the dimensionality basically affect the vector embedding retrieval speed. Also, I know some vector database actually charge based on the dimensionality of the embeddings, which means the higher dimensionality you have, the more money you have to pay for this kind of cloud services. So actually, I prefer a lower dimensionality to use a compact vector to represent more information. So if you look at OpenAI ADA embedding 002, their dimensionality was around 1536, so 1536. And the Gina V2 embedding models, the base version have a dimensionality of 738, something like that.
Yeah, I see. And there is 4,000, which will definitely cost folks more if they want to use this. Interesting release. Synthetic data sets looks like going to be more and more used. We know they're used in fine-tuning of open source LLMs. We know that they're used across everywhere, and people are skeptical, but it looks like using synthetic data sets also for embedding model fine-tuning is also possible. And both think, I didn't know that they use LoRa and they did less than 1,000 training steps, right, to get this model and get to the top of the leaderboards. Anything else here to recap on this model that you want to mention, or are we covered fully?
I just want to say really quickly for the audience, the reason that embeddings take up so much space for other languages is because when every language model has a vocabulary file, and what they do is words that are commonly used or verbs and stuff, they get their own token, which is just a number 0567, and other languages, they don't add complete words, but they merely add the letter. So if you have from many different Asian languages or Arabic or whatever, they just add the one letter. So each letter now takes up 0, 5, 6, 7, 8 number. So that's why it can even make a big difference in the API bill when you're paying for it. Like it can make 2-3 times more because it's taking it letter per letter and not compressing on entire words at once when the models are not optimized for the other languages.
Awesome. New state-of-the-art embeddings model, but it remains to be an interesting kind of design, but we don't know how useful this is. We'll keep watch whether or not this technique brings about some more advancements in the creation of an embedding model. Thank you, Bo, for covering this. Feel free to stick around with us. I want to welcome Junyang Lin to the stage. Welcome, Junyang.
Yeah, I'm Junyang, tech lead of the Quant team of Alibaba Group. Yeah, I would like to talk about the embedding model. Actually, I'm very interested in it. I'm working in an LLM, but I'm also cooperating with our embedding team. Actually, my colleagues are working on GTE, as you mentioned. My question is my question is, what is the essential advantage of decoder-only model in comparison with encoder-only model? As we have seen that previously, we have seen a lot of embedding model. We have done things with BERT-like models. We want to use GPT models to do it like that. And today we have seen something based on Mistral, but we did not see really large advantages in comparison with small model. You see that the previous state-of-the-art models are only have 500 million parameters, but now you have 7 billion parameters, but the gap is actually quite small. In average, I just checked the table. E5 is 66, and for BGE, it's 64. I don't think it is quite a large gap, and it is just for MTB. MTB is not a very large benchmark, and there are a lot of in-domain data, and actually, in my experience, it is not that hard to fit into that benchmark to reach a very good performance. So my question is still, what is the essential advantage of decoder-only model for embedding? I'm very curious about it. Yeah.
Okay. So actually, I don't really know because most of the research on the embeddings or embedding models or representation models, or what you call dense retrievers, based on the encoder-only architecture. So decoder architecture embedding model is something really new, but not exactly too new. This is because normally I think people did some testing on this decoder-only architecture. The first choice was from, I think also from Hugging Face. Someone called Nicholas, he's also the author of the MTB leaderboard. He basically published a paper, something called SGPT. This is the first decoder-only architecture trying to produce vector embeddings. So because of he tested normally when we are building the embedding model, the rationale is actually quite simple. After you get the model, you get all the token embeddings, and you take the average of these token embeddings to learn a representation of this model, or you use the CLS token as a representation of this model. But because decoder-only models, the tokens cannot attend to the future tokens. So what Nicholas did is he basically assigned a higher weights to the token embeddings appeared to the later tokens. So you will see the first token might have a very low weights. So if it is the second token, then the weights will be higher. So if the token is at the end of the sentence, which means you will give highest like the weights to this kind of token averaging architecture. He called it weighted mean average. That's the first decoder-only architecture used to train embedding models. But on the MTB leaderboard, it doesn't perform so well. Then this Mistral AI, Mistral 7B or E5 Mistral is basically the second try on this direction. terms of the MTDB leaderboard, it's actually not a small leaderboard. It has around 63 tasks or data sets, and some of the retrieval data sets or the tasks are actually quite large. So it's not a leaderboard which could easily overfit. The overfitting is actually came out from July or August last year after the reg become really a thing. So people are publishing more models, then this leaderboard gets a little bit destroyed.
A little bit more popular, right?
Yeah.
Welcome to the stage. I want to skip to the next thing just in the purpose of time, but definitely I will add both of you to the group chat that we have with the ThursdAI community, and would love to continue the conversation there. Thank you for joining, Junyang. The next thing that I wanted to talk about is actually fitting, because I think you're the one who posted about this. It's now pinned to the top of the space. You guys released QuenVL, an update to QuenVL. For folks who are not familiar with Quen and the QuenVL LMM, Quen is from Alibaba, right? You guys released several sizes before, and QuenVL is the vision-enabled version of this. Previously, and we reported on this on ThursdAI a couple of times. It was on the top of 7B Quen, and recently you've upgraded this to the plus version with 14B. Could you talk about QuenVL, how cool this is, and how much more can we expect from the multimodal area from you guys? Because this is super cool. I tested it. It really performs well.
Thanks for the appreciation. Yeah, we previously just released the large language model. We have released 4 sizes from 7, 14, and we have a very small one for 1.8, and mostly for mobile, and we have a very large one, 72. And for VL, and we based on the 7 billion large language model, and we built QuenVL, and this is our first release, and it is more like an experimental thing. It performs well on the benchmarks, but if you really use it, it's still far from application. But for QuenVL Plus, it is quite different. It is somewhat, I think if you really experience it, you will find that it is somewhat like GPT-4V. It's still lagging behind GPT-4V. It is not a very large model, but we find that we are now really approaching it. And we have compared the QuenVL Plus with the GeminiPro, and we find that in many scenarios they can reach very similar performance, and sometimes we can outcompete GeminiPro. And we also have tested it on the benchmark data sets. So if you're really interested about large multi-model in the benchmarks, then you can check on MMMU and Seedbench or things like that. I think they are good benchmarks for now. But if you really try it, you will find that it becomes smarter and it has fewer hallucination actually in comparison with the previous vision language model.
That's awesome. I tested both. I've definitely tested QuenVL when it came out, and I tested Idefix. So we definitely are into the LMMs here in ThursdAI. So we tested Idefix, Lava, and here worked on kind of the Obsidian, like smaller models. Do you find that like the bigger the underlying brain of LLM behind this, the better the model performs? Do you definitely find that?
Yes, the larger the large language model, it will help the visual reasoning, because visual reasoning is really relying on the capabilities of your large language model. Yeah. Another key is that we also scale the model by the vision encoder, not just scaling up the large language model. I cannot tell too many details about the architecture or things like that, but we're still using similarly the same model and the same training recipes. First, you pre-train the model with large scale in text pairs, and then you use multitask data, because there are a lot of vision language task data. So you can endow it with capabilities, and then you align it with, you usually do with T, or now we are also working on HFs or things like that. The recipe is quite simple, but what our model is different from most other large multi-model is that we pay a lot of attention to the pre-training stage. As you mentioned, Lava or mini GPT-4 or things like that, they may focus more on fine-tuning. We have also done things like that, but we find that it is hard for it to generalize to more scenarios or things like that. It is hard to generalize for a model without sufficient pre-training. So we spend a lot of time building large-scale pre-training data. So it is more about model scaling as well as data scaling. And we also test some techniques to keep the original information of the images, because if you train your vision language model, you may do a lot of processing that may cause a lot of information loss. So we have tried some techniques to keep the information during the pre-training so that we can input very large resolution images into the model, so that you can find that the model becomes smarter because they can really understand small objects. And another new capability of the new QuenVL is that it is quite capable in text recognition.
OCR, yeah, I was just about to ask about this. OCR is really good compared to the previous models.
Yeah, because we have some new techniques by recognizing the small object and also understanding high resolution images. So we can just use OCR data to train the model. Its OCR capability becomes much better. So you can just give a picture of a PDF and then you ask it to summarize and you ask some questions about it, and it can answer quite well. And surprisingly, we have found some emergent capabilities, and we did not implement the capabilities into the model, but we have found a case. I can show you a case. Suppose you are driving and you have seen some traffic signs, and there are words on the traffic signs, and then you ask, suppose you are an automatic driver, and then you give some choices for it to do, whether to speed up or speed down, and give the reason, and it can do such things. And it is very surprising for us because it can make a decision and give its reason. It's quite surprising. And another thing is that it can even solve mathematical problems. So if you just give a picture of a mathematical problem, for example,
from like a textbook picture with the drawing?
Yeah. Yeah, things like that. We have an example, which is a triangle. You know the length of the two legs, and you ask the model with the detailed length of the other leg, the other side, and it can calculate and gives the process of the mathematical reasoning. Because our large language model has the capability of solving mathematical problems by reasoning, and it is now very popular, and most LLMs can do these things. But if it combines with the vision information, it will make us feeling very surprising about it. Yeah.
That's awesome. Julian, thank you so much for the deep dive about this. This model is not open source weights yet, right? You guys didn't release this. We cannot run this. Could you speak about like when and if this is coming to us ability to use this locally?
Yeah, I cannot tell you guys the detailed time, but I am trying to make it open source. I hope it will be as soon as possible. I hope in a month it will happen or things like that. Yeah, because we really hope that you can use the model, but there are some difficulties for us to do things, and we need some time for the preparation. Yeah.
Absolutely. So first of all, thank you so much for coming up and talking about this. Second, thank you for the models. Like we've used Quen before and QuenVL, and this definitely in OCR area, I've noticed like a significant improvement. I've tested this with a very obscure image of a card, and it gave me as good performance as GPT-4 Vision did, which is incredible for a model this size and like that strength. Nistan, go ahead if you have a question for Julian.
Also, I had more questions. Since a lot of the clip style encoders squish together the images, for Baklava, we're trying to account more of that now. I was just curious, did you guys move on to a larger model, or is it around the same size as like the 336 by 336 as before? And so my question is, did you guys move on to a larger image embedding model? And the other one I wanted to know, what's your opinion on different takes on doing vision? Stuff is like Fuyu, for example, where they just arrange everything in a row, and then that doesn't matter too much on what the resolution is, on how they're doing it. So I wanted to know.
Yeah. I guess your question is about scaling the resolution, actually, because previously we are using for the open source QuantVL, we are using 448 times 448. That is relatively a small resolution. As you mentioned, Fuyu, I think Fuyu is a very good practice of using things like dynamic resolution, because as I said, you can keep the information of the original images. But this is one of the techniques, but the key is that you have to use large scale data and carefully clean it, and then you train it into your pre-train it into your models. Spend a lot of efforts in your model scaling and data scaling as well, and you keep the information just like Fuyu did, and you will create a very good model. And as you mentioned about the vision encoder, yeah, for now the vision encoder has some problems with things like resolution, because as you start from clip in vision encoder, clip VIT, so you will suffer from the problems. It is originally trained on like small resolutions like 336, and maybe for the next step we will consider building the vision encoder by ourselves, and then using it to combine with a larger Quen model. And also we need to scale the Quen LLM, for example, to the 72 billion, because the reasoning capabilities mostly came from the large language models. You need to scale both. Yeah, there are still a lot of difficulties, but we might see that maybe in someday we can really surpass the GPT-4b at this moment. Yeah.
I found the same thing. I haven't released the model, but it looked good when moving to a larger 11B model versus using 7B for Baklava. Even though I just used the exact same, did not further train the image encoder, the language side of the model was eating the embeddings a lot better. I was digesting them much better, and the end results were really good. We tried it on some farming data, like sea farming, and it was giving out much better. I tried it on like X-rays of medical and farming, and I found out even though the embeddings are the exact same, the image embeddings, it was just giving out much better information by going a bit larger. And I was surprised, because normally you expect same embeddings, you just need like a small tiny model, just to put them together. But no, it actually made a big difference, and that was also surprising to me.
Yeah, that is a very great insight, because I think previously there are a lot of people do not pay enough attention to the size of the LLM in many things. When they use LLM, they may think that in most cases, they may think that 7 billion is enough or things like that. But actually for vision language model, we find that scaling up the model, we find that in general, the vision language model will perform better when you scale up the large language model. In comparison with 7 billion model, we find that the 14 billion model performs way better than the 7 billion model. Yeah, I think we have reached very similar conclusion. Yeah.
So we're waiting for the results with the 70B Quen once you guys release this, Junyang. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for covering this, and we're hoping to see QuenVL in a place where we could like actually download the weights and use this. But definitely we've been talking about LMMs, large multimodal models, in 24 being the year of multimodal models. We have quite a few folks here on stage that train them, and we have some folks in the audience as well that release like smaller ones, Uform, and then works on Baklava team with Pharrell. And we've talked about Obsidian as well, a smaller one as well. It's interesting to see that the bigger the underlying model is, the higher quality the vision is. And so we're going to hopefully see more attempts there. But we do expect them to be smaller and smaller to run on devices, right? This is the end goal. The end goal is for us to be able to run things on device as well. All right. I think we have, so thank you, Junyang, for joining us. Feel free to stick around. We have a breaking news, folks. AI breaking news. Coming at you only on ThursdAI. I love using the sound. Folks, if you know ThursdAI, you know that as we speak on Thursday, many AI releases happen on Thursday for some reason. And thanks to Junaid, who I co-host the Denver AI meetup with him. By the way, if you're from Denver, feel free to follow us and ask us when and join us in the physical world. We do the AI Thinkers event in Denver. Junaid just sent me that GPT Store launches next week. He just got an email, and all of you who created like a custom GPT probably got an email as well. If you remember when GPT on Dev Day released GPTs, they also talked about a store for them as well. Right now, the only way to share GPTs, custom GPTs, is to send links to your friends, and they've talked about the marketplace for them. So back at Dev Day, they released kind of two major announcements. One of them is the GPTs that are consumer-based, that OpenAI kind of hosts for you, and then it doesn't cost you anything, and only premium accounts can access those. And another one is the Assistants API, where you as a developer, you kind of create agents and you pay for the storage. You as a developer, you pay for all of these. So GPTs, you don't pay nothing. You just kind of create them. And if those of you who maybe remember when we talked about them, I created one called Visual Weather GPT that's fairly successful. And there's others like Grimoire from Nick Dobos, a friend of the pod as well. And when they announced this, they also said, OpenAI, they also said, hey, we're going to have a marketplace for those GPTs. So people who will actually use them, you will get a revenue share as a creator of the GPT. A very interesting attempt of theirs, because the plugins, let's say, failed almost entirely, and they deprecated the plugin ecosystem. And honestly, it was really hard to find the plugins in there. You had to enable them. So now you have this like custom GPTs store that's coming in a week. So I don't know if it's going to be exactly a week. They say, the email literally says, "Dear GPT builder, we want to let you know that we'll launch the GPT store next week. If you're interested in sharing GPT, you'll need to do a review, blah, 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 properties, and set up a builder profile," which I'm going to do immediately after this. Because Visual Weather, it's one of the cooler GPTs that I was able to see, and many people used it. So I'm looking forward to see and report to you how much revenue share I'll actually see from this GPT. A very interesting one. Some breaking news. I love breaking news. And I think we're almost there, folks. We're coming up on 2 hours. We got 10 minutes left. And the last two things I wanted to cover real quick. The OCU NLP lab, they released Mind2Web dataset and evaluation benchmark. Mind2Web basically collected a bunch of web acting agent tasks, ordering a flight on the United website, or looking for a specific Netflix show, etc. And they've collected previously, I think it was back in June. Yeah, in June. They collected like 2,300 tasks from over 130 websites. Stuff like booking flights and finding folks on Twitter, for example. They have one task, hey, find Elon Musk on Twitter and follow him. And so those type of like agentry tasks, they collected those. And previously with GPT-4, what they tried to just pass the HTML or the text of the website and get GPT-4 to tell you like what to click. And GPT-4 did, I don't know, maybe succeeded around 2% of the time, and the rest of it failed because it needed vision, and websites are built for people. And these guys then just recently released a C-Act is the same attempt to solve this Mind2Web just with the vision capabilities of GPT-4, which we've talked about. We just talked about Junyang just dove deep into LLMs as well. And they show that with the vision capabilities, C-Act, their agent that clicks this, and with action grounding, which we're going to talk about in a second, achieves a 50% score on this evaluation task, right? GPT-4 without vision gets around 2%. I don't know if it's 2 or 20. They may have a typo there, but C-Act achieves a 50% evaluation score on this Mind2Web dataset evaluation they released as well. And the way it does this, it does first an action generation. So it produces a textual description of the action that needs to happen, and it uses the actual screenshot of the website to actually do this correctly. And if you use GPT-4 Vision, it's really good. OCR is really good as well. But definitely it's understanding of how a website behaves, what a button is, where to click, what's enabled, what's active. That's very impressive. And so it uses their C-Act first uses action generation to produce a textual description for each step. And then it performs an action grounding. And I think this is the interesting thing here. Action grounding identifies the correct corresponding HTML element, like the button or the action needed, like a click or a type or typing a name or select or something. And because it's very interesting that they say, because websites, we have a rendered version of the HTML, but we also have the HTML source code. It actually maps incredibly well to the multimodality of GPT-4 vision, where you can provide the understanding for the action in a screenshot and have it understand where should I go in order to perform one action or another one. But then in order to actually ground the actions, they use the HTML code behind the scenes. When they find the correct elements on the HTML page corresponding to the action that they need to do. And this action grounding helps them perform significantly well on those tasks. It's very exciting, first of all, because this area of browsing the web for you it's been really annoying so far with just code. If you ever wrote a parser or something that goes to the website, parses something, it's been really annoying, and definitely those parsers do not understand how the website actually looks. And with vision and LMMs, it's going to be very interesting to see how far people can take this. It's also very interesting of whether or not we would like those agents to actually do stuff for us, right? Will you be able to have your agent book a flight for you? Do you need this? Do you actually need to browse the web of United, or is it better to a custom United agent or something like this? So it's going to be interesting as this research continues, but it's great to see that, as we speculated, the vision part of GPT-4 actually significantly helps on those specific tasks of browsing web and doing things like this. In addition to this, we know already that there's a lot of agent frameworks that do this. For example, Multion was able to actually go through the California DMV license test and completely successfully and actually get a license. I think Div from Multion actually showed a license that was delivered to his door from the agent that does this. And I think they use vision as well. And multiple other vision enabled kind of agents are running around the web. So it's great to see the CACT thing from the OCU NLP lab coming out. And the paper obviously was released as well. And the grounding, action grounding is a cool idea. Folks on stage, feel free. If you have any comments on CACT, have you seen this? Have you gotten excited as I got excited about this? Feel free to comment.
I'm pretty excited, Alex, about it, because you know that we are working with agents and a lot of actions are taking place using these screens, actually, in some of the enterprise applications as well, in terms of invoice recognition and everything. So this is going to be great. We haven't tried the framework yet. We have few things planned before that, but we are definitely looking into integrating it if it stands the requirement. Currently, we are using things like Puppeteer already for orchestrating that, but this could be really interesting.
Puppeteer, just for folks who don't know, is a way to run kind of actions on an HTML, running a browser and actually say, hey, click this button, click this element, do this thing. Go ahead, Nistan.
I love this application layer stuff because we'll just be able to swap in open source models once they're good enough for this, and you'll be able to just run them locally and have full ownership of your data. So yeah, that's what I'm going to say. I'm glad they're doing it.
I think one of the comments from the author from CACT was, hey, next we're going to explore the open source models. Open source weren't as good. He mentioned the open source models are really good at like object detection, but not that great at specific text, etc. So Junyang, I think I tagged you under that thread, and hopefully once you guys release something like a QuenVL Plus, would they be able to plug this in? Have you seen the CACT thing, or what's your comments on it?
Yeah, I have just read the Twitter and I haven't read the paper or the detailed stuff, but I know the task. Actually, there's a previous work called COG Agent, just doing something very similar. Actually, we are doing some testing on these tasks to see if we can browse the web page and do some actions or things like that. I'm not surprised GPT-4b can do these things because I know the language model of GPT-4 is very capable of reasoning and planning, and if it integrates with the visual understanding, it will do something very interesting. And we find that QuenVL can, to some extent, do these tasks, and maybe later we will also release the evaluation of these tasks or things like that. One thing I would like to comment is about grounding. And actually last year in our research, we have unified the grounding with text generation, and also for QuenVL, another typical basic capability of QuenVL is the visual grounding. You send a prompt and you just draw the bounding box of the related objects. And now for the new model, it can draw the boxes more accurately. If the basic capabilities, you have very high level basic capabilities and you integrate them together, combine them together, and you will do very fantastic stuff. Yeah.
No, I just wanted to add to, I think it was Cheng Yang who was talking about it. So we are actually trying out the Cog VLM and Cog Agent, because Cog Agent is actually, you have 11 billion visual parameters and almost, I think, 6 or 7 billion language parameters that it is trained on. So that could be a formidable competitor as well in terms of the actions.
The one thing that Cog VLM is good at that our models of it is not is actually pointing at coordinates on the screen. And that's, you need that for web browsing. You need it to point accurately. And there are still some challenges there to figure out. Again, keep in mind, 3 months from now, all of this is going to look very old. There's going to be other models and replacements out.
Yep. Speaking of how quickly things change, the last thing that I wanted to cover before I let you guys go, I know we're 2 hours, so I'll briefly cover this. Stanford, who features prominently in ThursdAI, we keep talking about the stuff that they released, Mobile Aloha. Mobile Aloha is a video. If you haven't seen this, I pinned it to the top of the space. Will be in the show notes afterwards. Back in March, folks from Stanford introduced Aloha, which is a low-cost open hardware system for bimanual teleoperation. Somehow out of this mess of words, they found Aloha in it, which is basically a way for a human to drive 2 arms, and then robotic arms on the other side will perform the same as the human does. So teleoperation, right? And I will add the image of this in the show notes. It looks pretty cool. And so it's like basically like a 4-arm robot that you control 2 arms, and then the other arms that you control, they perform the action. And using off-the-shelf, like open hardware materials, not specific stuff, you can actually build one yourself for around like $20,000, or you can actually buy one. So they released this back in March. And since then, they've been like, since 10 months later, they created the mobile version of this, which looks like a Roomba with a PC tower on top of it and a laptop or whatever. And this thing allows the operator to actually be strapped in there in the arms and perform a bunch of tasks like cook and clean and order like an elevator to come up, etc. And so they have a top camera from this as well. So they see all of these actions from the perspective of the robot and not the human. And so they have this human walking around Stanford, probably like doing these tasks with the like teleoperation robot. And now they released like a mounted version of this with a, with a robotics arm and the brain basically that allows the bot to do the same task autonomously that the user already performed it. So they taught the robot like with the user operator, there's a metaphor in here somewhere for sure. But they taught the bot and they recorded all of the required information, etc. They probably have a vision encoder somewhere in there as well. And then they basically showed a bunch of examples of that bot operating and doing those examples on its own. They show a bunch of cooking stuff. It breaks a few eggs and puts them in and whisks them together. It cooks a shrimp. And it's pretty incredible to see just on the video of like the task that it does. Now, again, this is not like generalized task. It doesn't do them on its own. Like those are user created tasks that it knows how to do, but it does generalize to some extent. It generalizes, for example, they have a task to push chairs inside, in restaurants at the end of the day, they push the chairs inside. So they show this task and then, they taught it on 3 chairs and there's 2 more chairs. So it generalizes and completes the other 2 chairs as well. And they have, they have a bunch of other examples like cooking, etc. It's pretty cool to see. This adds to, if you guys remember, we briefly covered Ego XO4D, which is a data set from Meta. A huge data set consists of, 1,000 tasks or so. The task like from a first-person perspective and a third-person perspective, and collected a bunch of metrics around it from cooking and cleaning and sports and healthcare. Basically a huge data set from a first-person perspective. They strapped a camera on top of the people recording this face, but they also had a camera watching that person from the side to also take it around the context. So this connects to the robotics era where, we have these like huge data sets, and now there's like open hardware that people can actually buy. It costs like $20,000, or at least the previous version of this Aloha bot cost $20,000. I don't know if the mobile version is much more expensive, but smaller labs like Stanford that don't have the huge money and robotics like the Tesla bot, for example, they'd be able to still show us some wins and build bots that cook for us. And my personal question about this is, when will they have bot that folds laundry? Because that's personally the first thing. If I buy a bot, that's the first thing I'm going to look for, the abilities. Can it fold laundry for me? Because I hate that task. Mobile Aloha is pretty cool. We're around the 2-hour mark. We've covered a lot this week, so let's run quickly through the stuff that we've covered. We've covered the new WizardCoder, which was breaking news for us. It was released 2 hours ago before, achieving a 79% of HumanEval, barely breaking the percentage point from what it was fine-tuned on, which is DeepSeek Coder. But still, it's pretty cool to see advances from WizardCoder. We've talked about maybe using this in a proxy behind the VS Code stuff. It's pretty cool. We covered Teknium's Hermes2 fine-tuned on Solar 10.7b. Solar models now rule the Open LLM leaderboard on Hugging Face. They're not as good as other models on the the LMC's human tested evaluation, but definitely they're very good at the benchmarks. And so now we have a new Hermes2 Solar that's around 10 billion parameters. You can run this on the Mac M1, I think. I've been running this locally. It's pretty decent. I even told a story about how I used it instead of an actual GPT-4, which refused, and missed a reminder to me to send you that snippet that GPT-4 failed or refused to translate for me. We also covered Microsoft's new state-of-the-art embeddings model called E5, and we actually had Bo Wang from Gina and give us an in-depth view as an expert on embeddings, and it's huge. It's an embedding model that was trained on Mistral. And apparently, based on the brief feedback we had from Bo and discussions, because of its size and dimensionality, it may not be super practical. But then a conversation with Jun Yang was very interesting to hear about that type of approaches for embeddings models, and maybe we'll see some more stuff. Specifically, that was trained on synthetic data and was trained on a bunch of languages as well. And it was like a LoRa on top of Mistral. So it's very easy to train a top performing embedding model, but it's huge and not sure how practical this is. We covered Samsung is about to announce some AI stuff. We definitely mentioned breaking news from Junaid that OpenAI GPT store is about to launch next week. And so if you had an idea for a GPT and you want to make some potential money from OpenAI, now is your time. We covered Perplexity announces around and now is a leading proprietary search with AI. Then on vision stuff, we had the great pleasure, thank you Jun Yang for joining us. We had the great pleasure to have Jun Yang from tech lead from the Alibaba group that works on LLMs and LMMs. And we've talked about QuenVL. QuenVL is a large multimodal model that's now upgraded to the 14 billion parameters, hopefully coming soon in the ability for us to use this. Right now you can use this on Hugging Face, and this will be in show notes as well. And we've talked about its enhanced OCR capabilities and the fact that it has emergent properties like being able to solve math problems just by screenshots, which is super cool, and other emergent properties that they've seen that they haven't trained on. And the very great insight that the bigger the underlying language model is, the better performing it even on visual tasks, which is super cool. We're going to continue probably seeing some stuff around there. In my personal use cases, Quen actually performed as well as GPT-4 for some tasks, which is really cool. And then we talked about CACT just briefly. Oh, we actually had VB from Hugging Face. We actually had Omar from Hugging Face as well, Chief Llama Officer. But we had VB before, and VB talked about the recent release from Suno and NVIDIA that beats Whisper on English automatic speech recognition as much as one less mistake per 100 words, and runs significantly faster with the new architecture as well. It's not doing great on other languages because it's only English right now, but it's significantly faster than the fastest Whisper implementation from Hugging Face, which is again from VB, and it's called Insanely Fast Whisper. So apparently this new, not only it beats it on word error rate, which is the metric on different data sets, it also is significantly faster, which is super cool. And recently we just talked about the mobile Aloha bot, the bot that is able to drive around Stanford and click buttons and cook food, etc. And super cool. I think that's most of what we covered today, folks. It's been great to have you. Just about 2 hours and 15 minutes. I want to say a huge thanks to the host on stage, co-host Nistan and Umesh. Thank you for joining me from week to week. The guests who joined, we had Bo, we had VB, we had Omar, we had Jun Yang, and we had Asaf as well. Welcome, folks. Thank you for joining. We're always welcome to join as well. My name is Alex Volkov. I'm an AI evangelist with Weights and Biases. So shout out Weights and Biases as well for letting me do this as my job. And I love it. And with that, I think we'll end here. Have a great week. And we'll see you next Thursday. Next Thursday, we'll likely have an interview with LM Studio, which is the best way to run these models that we keep talking about on your Mac. And I've been using this, and LM Studio is great. So we're going to have a deep dive there. And we're going to talk about all the reasons why such a thing should exist. And I'll see you here next week. Cheers, everyone.